So, Cho, I'm really, really glad to have you on. And I'm super excited about this conversation that we are going to have about fertility, Chinese medicine, and probably a host of other things over the course of our time together. So, why don't you start by sharing with the ladies listening how you got into Chinese medicine and how you started focusing in on fertility?
Okay. Well, thank you, Roseanne, for having me on your podcast. So I got into Chinese medicine, acupuncture, Chinese medicine. This is after working in the corporate arena, uh, you know, doing what I was supposed to do, and then, like finding that it was not really fulfilling and looking for something that I would love to do, that I could help people. And, it's really something that you continue to do. And the more you practice, the more you learn, the better you get. And so with, like the difference between the East and the West, as you get older, you're wiser and you have all this wisdom and you can really help people, versus, in the West, the profession is, oh, you're older, you're outdated. And so it's really like, the polarity of it is, this is the difference, right? I have a lot, the longer I'm practicing now, 21 years, the much more, knowledge that I have and that I hold, that I can help people. And Chinese medicine is thousands of years old. So we look at, there's a lot of empirical knowledge that is here that we can look at, that, that there was no agenda, right, for it. It's actually, this is what worked. And if it didn't, people died. What has me specialize in fertility, or really like women's health, is that there's so much knowledge that is there. And really it's, I would say that my patients are what directed me to where I, have this expertise. And so early in my practice, I noticed, women were coming, and back then it was like 39, 40. They got married later. Now they want to have a child. And so there was this really like, I need to do whatever I can. And also they were also pressure to go to these fertility clinics, because then, at 40, they wouldn't take you, right? So it was, yeah, they were like, oh, you age out of even doing like IVF. And so I was like, wow, listening to these stories, I was like, that's not true. Like really what they're being told is not true. And so, it really made me feel like, all right, I got to do something about this, because I'm just listening and I'm like, oh, no, no, no. I'm like, biological and chronological age are not the same. Right. And yes, there's statistics, but those are also really, like looking at, these are the women that are coming that are struggling. What about the rest of the population that's not struggling? No one really keeps track of, how many women get pregnant over 40, or even some women at 50, right? And so you start to look at how the data is skewed, and now even more and more really skewed, because you do a search and then the algorithm changes, and before you know it, you're just receiving data about age and what fertility clinics and what you need to do, and really wearing down, a woman's resolve or confidence in her own body, just constantly saying there's something wrong with you because you didn't get pregnant within a year. And I'm kind of like, a year? Like who set that mark up? Who decided that? Who decided that? We don't even know. You can't say a year for everyone. That's the standard. None of us are standard. We're all like a snowflake, right? So,
Right.
and also, Chinese medicine is personalized. You have protocols, but personalization is really what makes a difference. And, yeah. And so that's what I look at, is this relationship, how you can really help somebody and they don't feel
Yeah.
like a number.
Yeah, and I love that you say that, because I think there's so many of the women listening that it's like as women, we get sort of painted into a corner unknowingly. Okay. So we're told that, and I love that you said you did what you were supposed to do in the corporate world. And then you found that, like, hey, I want something a little bit more satisfying to my soul. I want something that's going to be, more purpose driven, not like you can't have purpose in corporate, but that there was something pulling you more toward this as a calling. And I think that's really cool. I mean, I think it's the same type of thing that pulls women toward having babies. But after having pursued what they're supposed to do, they find themselves in a position where everything around them is telling them it's too late.
Yeah. And that's somebody else's idea. And this is very distressing because they kind of feel like they had to trade. They did a trade. Oh, well, you chose your career. Now this is the result. It's your fault, right? And again, that's not, like women needing to make a choice. Also balancing your life, your home life, it's really like your life, right? And so you don't have to give, like the corporate world, that energy is like, go, 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 succeed, get to the top, right? And that's very, I mean, it's exciting to a certain degree, but then after, there's like a kind of emptiness there. And what I find is not only that part is empty, but then when they believe that maybe they missed something that, like, now for them is like, wow, that's something really important, that becomes that soul crushing feeling of like every failure, every month that they don't get pregnant, it just continues to reinforce that it's not going to happen because you
Right.
didn't do whatever. And so that is a big, and I know you work a lot with mindset. That is, with my patients, that is we got to look at your fertility mindset, especially after they are doing everything they're supposed to do, with diet, exercise, and going to a clinic that then tells them, oh, because you're over 35, that your eggs are probably not good. Like, that's the last thing that they need to hear. And it's also not true. Right. So they are getting pulled into something they really want. And, having a child, as you know, if you didn't have one, you really wouldn't know what it's like. And then now, once you do have one, you really are like, oh my God, I don't want anyone to miss. If they want to have a child, I don't want them to miss this experience that is not easy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's why I'm so driven to do what I do. And I'm sure it drives what you do. You have your daughter, I have my son. And both of us could have been fertility journey roadkill had we believed, the line that it was too late for us or that we were too broken down.
Yeah. Well, what I have to confess, so here is because it is in my book. I grew up in a medical um, household. Like, my father was a doctor, my mom was a nurse, right, in the Western world. And I did have, when I was very young, I was 7, I was in the hospital for appendicitis, but they didn't know what it was. They weren't sure because it's so unusual. And so I ended up staying in the hospital for over a month, and I was poked, I was prodded, I was really like, it, I was treated very well because a doctor's child, I got to, walk around and, but I also got this sense that they didn't know what they were doing. And I remember there was this one, I guess, resident, this young guy who was trying to, do an IV, and he kept on missing my vein, right? Which made, and so at one point, they changed my to be on, instead of being on an IV, to be on like clear liquid. But then they were like, okay, we want to run more tests. We want to put you on an IV. And this guy shows up. And I remember saying, they're like, oh, we need to put it in. And I was like, he can't touch me. Not him. It was like, yeah. So I would say that I've always kind of had a little bit of I'm a little skeptical. The surgeon, after they took out my appendix, I wanted to actually see it. So he walked me down to pathology. So I got to see what it looked like, what had come out. So with that, I'm really like, you can ask ask the question. Like if you're going like, what does it really mean? And a lot of times, in a consult, when they start giving you statistics, it's somebody else's numbers. Like that's the thing. It's somebody else. So
Yeah.
it's like, I'm sitting in front of you. Yes, I have these things, but you're quoting me. It's like you're looking at someone else's chart and you're not really seeing me. And so it's really like, I'm going to tell you what your chances are based on somebody else.
Mm.
And so we have to be really clear. And that's like one of the things, like you have to understand those are other people's numbers. We're talking about you, and bringing that person back into, this is about you, not about them. I mean, it's information for sure. It's information, but it's also very curated and very specific in terms of then how they're going to treat you based on those little things like age and certain numbers. And that's how they're going to approach it, but they're not looking at the whole picture.
Right. Right. I mean, I love that you're raising this, because that's something that I hear women all the time, but the numbers, but the statistics, but and it's like, yeah, let's think critically, because that's really what you and I are talking about at this point, is critical thinking, right?
Right.
Is to think critically about, look, if you're on the fertility journey and yeah, you may have been trying for a year, but as you said, that might not mean anything.
Right.
Okay. It's a marker. It's something to be aware of, but it's certainly not something to like run screaming out of the house and going to the first fertility clinic that you can find, right? It's a piece of awareness. Just like when you go for a consult and you're hearing all these things. In fact, I did a live last night with an amazing fertility doctor and Dr. Zahir Murhi, and we were having this great conversation about like the statistics are but one aspect. There's a constellation of other things to be considering. And yeah, I mean, in Chinese medicine, my guess, I mean, I had a bunch of acupuncture and went to and had Chinese medicine as part of my experience. But I'm sure from your perspective, age, statistics, all these other things are probably lower on the totem pole when you're considering how to help somebody.
Yeah. What's really important is going to be their whole health history. And so I look at, things that we're going to need to really change, like sleep patterns are big, food sensitivities, things that cause inflammation. So really and again, oftentimes when you look at the whole health history, you see a picture of a pattern of what may be like something they need to shift. And oftentimes it's masked. It's some, constantly, I had mono, I had strep, I had this, I get colds every year. I have ear infect, like all of that. And I'm like looking like seasonal, or every fall I get this cold, or I get a common cold, and oftentimes, or recurring bladder infections or yeast infection. And so you look at it like, oh, but I took something and and it didn't come back. But I go like, you know what? Oftentimes these things are just lingering, and there's like an underlying problem that's continuously going on. And that is a disruptor. So we need to clean that up. Like definitely the diet and the gut stuff is huge. The microbiome of your gut is also going to affect the microbiome inside the, vagina, right? All of it. This is mucous membrane. If, someone takes a lot of antihistamines, right? They're very drying. So we're like, oh, my sinuses. But I go, okay, but you know what? It's also going to cause problems with your gums because this is mucous membrane too, right? And also vaginally, it's going to cause dryness, right? So there are different, it's going to have an effect or even like the soaps, like all of those environmental factors that we have around us, the plastics, like we need to kind of like look at these things which can be, disrupting the overall health and balance of the person. So it's not just looking at what is your cycle or your hormone levels, because those are the symptoms of the body being out of balance, right? So we need to look at the big picture. And especially stress is like the biggest disruptor there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, that was definitely, I think, a critical aspect of even, what I was looking at on my own journey. But I think people don't, I mean, like, look, the easy thing for people to do is to run and try to get a pill. Give me a pill, doc. Give me something. Give me something, right? Because what we're talking about here is a more holistic approach, an approach that, might take a little bit more time and takes a little bit more nuance and investigation. And I think, it's coming from a slightly different angle, but I think even the best Western physicians are truly looking at a more holistic approach, because you can medicate something to shit, but that's not necessarily going to yield the result that people actually want. Because I think when you and I are talking, we're talking not just about pregnancy, we're talking about 40 full weeks of healthy pregnancy.
Exactly. Yeah. So it has to happen actually like way before. Like yeah. And then that's another, like I want it now, or I've been trying. And then there's this urgency and the stress around it. And so it's kind of like your eggs will be okay for a few months. You're not going to, lose anything by taking, 3 to 6 months or a year to get yourself into condition, like to really be like, in alignment, right? Like everything comes into alignment. But if you're rushing into, I got to do it now because it's too late, or my FSA is going to run out, or I have this one thing, like there are all of these other things that are influencing the choice you're making for your health.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And I think you would agree with this. That thing that's often influencing it is lack and scarcity.
Oh, sure.
Time,
sure.
money, opportunities, all of these things.
Yeah.
And what do we know? Fear-based choices suck.
Right. But going into it, it's still not going to help if they're afraid. And really, I mean, I'm not against, I mean, I help a lot of women that are doing IUI, IVF, and they're like, I don't want to do it. I want to do it naturally. And I go like, well, here's the thing. It's a lot of help doing it medically, right? To medicate it. But if it's like, it's not unnatural. It's just it wouldn't be probable in nature. Let's put it that way. But it's not unnatural, because if it's really unnatural outside of nature, then it wouldn't be possible. Right. So we have to kind of like look at, you're getting a lot more help with it. So if there's an issue where a tube is blocked, or your partner's sperm is, not swimming and there's just a little bit or something like that, then it's really like removing these obstacles that, because we're in this, I won't say a time crunch, but like in this period of time that we're helping those things to come together that, there are blocks. So a lot of it is also that anguish of like, oh, it should be, romantic, and it should this, and then that actually, even going into a site, like a medicated cycle or doing it, that they're like, struggling against it
Yeah.
versus we're living it also in this time where you have these like choices and you do both.
Mhm.
You integrate. It's not one or the other. It's really like integrate. And that's what I tell my patients. Look, we're going to, help you regulate your cycle. I'm going to help you to reset your nervous system. We're going to work on all of these things for 3 to 6 months. And hopefully you get pregnant in that time. But if you don't, and you've decided by the end of the year, you're going to go to, start looking into a clinic or look at what the options are. So you don't feel at the end of the year, you're going to be like, oh my God, now I have to do this thing. Um, but one thing we know for sure is the success rate is going to be tremendous, so much more because you've been doing all this work all along. So every
Yeah.
move you make is a move forward, right? And that's what, like whatever you're doing, every time you go to bed a half an hour earlier, that's progress. Like every time you choose to have a green tea instead of, diet drink, although I tell no diet stuff. Um, yeah, like those little things that you're making consciously making that decision, you're moving forward. And if it hasn't happened yet, it doesn't, you're still building the successes. You're on your way, right?
100%. I mean, and it's interesting because and I love that you raised that because that's a powerful reframe of this idea that oh, I got to hurry up and, 3 to 6 months, because most people when they hear that they freak out. Oh, I don't have time for that. Like I'm already 40 or I'm already 45, but it's like, wait a second. Why don't you do the stuff ahead of time that's going to set you up for success? Whether it's Chinese medicine, mindset, all of these things. It's like when there is an alleged time crunch, there's never been a more critical time to have your ducks in a row, right? Like make sure your diet's clean, you know, give yourself the confidence because I think you would agree, Cho. I mean, there's a certain level of confidence that comes from knowing you did the work.
Oh yeah. Like everything you've done, like the last thing you want to do is like go in and like worry like, oh, I should have done it. Or like, because that conversation happens too, right? Oh,
Yeah.
why didn't I? And I do. I mean, I have patients that come to me after they've had failed cycles and they're like, well, this time I think I want to do something a little more holistic. And, they are in a place of kind of, we got to dig them out of the regret, or maybe I should have, or I don't know what happened, or why didn't I do it? And just be like, look, this is, um, we're doing this now. Even if you had a failed cycle, you already know what was used, how you responded. So this is good information on what we can do now to move forward. So it's all information, right? It's going to
Yeah.
be all information. But yeah, Chinese medicine also includes like your mindfulness, really important. What you think matters, right? Like all of it. And
Yeah. Well, so what would you say? I mean, because a lot of the women listening to this they're either trying naturally, they're in treatment, or they're considering treatment. And so, from a Chinese medicine perspective, let's say that somebody's had already a failed IUI, right? And they're starting to think, well, maybe this isn't going to be as straightforward as I thought. Uh-oh. Where would you have them start? Like where under Chinese medicine perspective would you have somebody start?
well, first thing that I do is I would have take a look at everything. I have to look at their whole health history. Um, Definitely one of the first exercises they get is developing that fertility mindset, which is reframing. What are you telling yourself? What are you saying to yourself? My body, oh, I'm too old, I'm this, my eggs are no good. Okay, now you have to write down exactly what you say to yourself. And now you need to write down something else that's empowering. My eggs are
Mm.
perfect. My body is healthy. The time is now. There are, uh, first of all, sleep is a big thing that we need to look at the quality of sleep, because that's where, our sleep hormones and reproductive hormones are in the same, we need to shift the circadian rhythm. And this is really like yin and yang balance, right? So I write about that in some articles, is really like, this is about yin and yang balance. The partner, because I know we talk mostly about the women, but for men, really important sleep, and sleep at night, right? For them, men are really much, very affected by staying up late. It affects the sperm production, right? So it's not just like, 7 hours of sleep all day, stay up all night. No, they really need to be in alignment. So those are like things like, because then what you're doing is you're using the energy of the universe. And this is really, Chinese medicine is based on, understanding the yin and the yang, the movement of qi. And this is understanding the transformations of the energy of the universe. And so when you understand that, and it's like you are having this energy flowing through you. So also understanding like the concept. So this is where, the thing of perfection. So I think chapter 8, I have a thing on perfection, which is really, where, a lot of, especially women, because they're always thinking there's something wrong with them. And, there is everything in the media telling them there's something wrong with them. So what happens is that they get really stuck on perfection. And then that is like a very, I would say, dangerous road to go down, but it is. And so really, stay away from the chat rooms, clear the cookies on your electronics, because,
I'm so glad you're saying that, Joe.
huh?
I'm
That's why
so glad
cookies,
you're saying that.
I'm like, cookies are bad for you. I mean, the cookies are bad for you. So, but that's that thing, like these are things that you need to do like immediately, because it will constantly be sending you these messages and wear you down. Right. And as many times as you're giving yourself positive reframe, and looking at that, it's going to lead you down a rabbit hole. Also, the feng shui thing, like don't talk to people who are negative about, or have like a terrible story, or are going to like tell you what you should do or you shouldn't do. Right. So really like who you're speaking to. I'm a proponent of more plant-based, right? So that's, like certain foods, and also not eating processed foods, even if they're like healthy organic. So we see a lot of it in, let's say, like Whole Foods. You're like, oh, I got this green juice, but it's in a big plastic container, or, like food. So the convenience stuff, it's still processed. And, if you can make your own food, or, know what the source is, and take care of it for yourself, do that. That's a self-care. Consciously preparing your own food for yourself. And this ties into your 10 fingers of virtue, right? Like you are manifesting this delicious meal. Your energy is going into it. You're consciously choosing these ingredients that you're going to put into your body, and you're going to recognize how good it feels and how you're nourishing yourself, right? By those choices. So these are things that I have patients like to be more conscious. The other is like to ditch those digital apps that are constantly telling like, oh, this is when your period is coming. And then, I mean, I had a patient who was putting in her, her dates, and then her cycle was a little bit longer. And she was like, but wait a second. It said now that my ovulation was this time, but before it told me that time. And I was like, oh my God, it's changing the information to match an outcome, which is not your outcome. And I was like, we know that your fertile window was here. We know that. And now it's telling you, oh, maybe it was another date. I'm like, that's not
Oh,
accurate,
oh
right?
my gosh. That's like having AI take over your cycle. It's like, it's just, it's monstrous.
It is monstrous. And so like, when did you have when you're like, oh, let me check my phone. And I'm a little like, okay, your phone should not be telling you. I mean, you can put it in a calendar, fine. But also I'm a little like, these are private companies that are gathering your data, right? And,
Yeah.
and in some states, I don't think you want people to have access to what's happening to you with your reproduction. But so one of the things is I will teach them how to know like what's happening with your body, being able to take a temperature. Yeah,
It's got to do it, show, because I think your point is well taken. Because even before we started this recording, we were talking about how, especially in a culture where we've been given birth control and some women are on birth control for decades, like there's this disconnection between us and our bodies and our minds and knowing what's right for us.
absolutely. I mean, this is kind of like, oh, you don't need to worry or know anything about your body. We'll take care of it for you. And you're like, okay, you're managing this powerful organ, because in Chinese medicine, the uterus is a curious organ. And it is connected to your heart. There's a special channel called the Bao Mai, which connects your heart and your uterus. Getting your cycle, when you get it's considered heavenly water. It's known as the Tangui, the heavenly water, which comes down and that sparks your ability to reproduce. This is powerful stuff, right?
Yeah.
So this is where, being in alignment. So really having, let's say, the mind body connection is part of like, oh, I feel my body. I know what's going on. I need to rest. I need to eat. I need to use the bathroom. This is known as also interoception, when you develop that ability to be like, oh, I feel something. I'm going to calm myself down, right? Oh, I can feel anxious. I know what that feels like for me. I can self-regulate. This is this power that we have. And we, through meditation, through awareness and consciously making choices, and being connected to ourselves, very, very present, we develop even more this ability, which we already have, right? Just like animals have, they know to go and start making, a little burrow or burying nuts. They could feel like, oh, the temperature is, changing. It's time for, they're so connected to nature. We're very disconnected, and being connected to our body of just knowing like, oh, this food is good for me. This isn't good for me. Right. Like, is part of developing that. And so one of the things that I will teach is like, okay, this is what happens in the arc of we could look at the blood cycle, the qi cycle, the yang cycle, and then the yin cycle, right? In the Chinese medicine wheel. And, so the different things that are happening in your body, which you may experience, are going to indicate, this is the fertile window. And so many telltale, of course, the cervical mucus, your temperature, right? And then now we have these pea sticks, right? Which will kind of tell you that, hey, you've released this hormone, which means, like you're going to be ovulating in 24 to 36 hours. And then you can also tell by, libido and things like that. And so to really like know your cycle and you can measure it, I like to have them do it on a chart. So I go like every day, it's like a meditation. You take your temperature and then you chart it, and you've done your one thing to move you forward. right? You've done this thing.
I love that show. It's kind of funny when I was charting my basal body temperature, man, I was in hardcore perfection. If the thing was not where it was supposed to be, like I would torment myself for the whole next day, and all of this craziness that we can get into when we're trying to take control of our fertility. But what you're talking about and the way you talk about it is more from an empowerment standpoint. There's not a fear-based driver, like from, your perspective. It's just getting to know your body, understanding these things so that you're not in a position where you're over reliant on technology and then possibly manipulated into thinking that you're broken.
Right. I mean, that is because we're not broken. And well, like one of the things is that we are meant for life to move forward. And I also believe that, fertility is more than biology and hormones, right? That there is this spiritual aspect, this energy for us to be able to receive, right? So these beings are going to come through us, not from us, but really, so we are this vessel, and understanding that we are this vessel to be in, to be able to like have this being share, is going to share our body, and we're going to be, giving it the nutrients, et cetera, is a different like understanding that there's something greater, and that we kind of have to be ready, like, and that's like the difference of I want to get it to getting it or having it is really like receiving it. And so, and that's what we're looking at, right? So we're like, okay, I'm ready, and oftentimes that's, and, energetically, I also have, um, my patients do, was known as a feng shui cure, which was given to me by, this fellow, Dr. Richard Tan, who's no longer here. He was a feng shui master, Chinese medicine practitioner. And so I was in graduate school, and I was talking to him, and he goes, "You want to have a baby?" And I said, "Yeah, like we're doing everything." And I also share it in my book. He said, "Okay, you need to take a picture of you and a picture of your husband, and you get a picture of a baby, and you're going to put them together, and you wrap a red ribbon around it, and you're going to stick it under your mattress." And energetically, what that is that you're already creating it in a way, in a form, like it's already here. And of course, under the mattress, because that's where you sleep. So if you're there like 8 hours, right, or 7 hours or whatever, like you're energetically bringing this in, and it's there. Like you're kind of like, it's already, a part of you, right? Just like people have pin boards, like some might say, like make a vision board, a Pinterest, put what you envision. And it's good for your partner to do it too. You can have one to share, because sometimes you're like, what does having a child look like? And the husband is like ski trips, this and that. And then your board might be, birthday cakes and, other stuff. And really like, hey, this could also be like, do you have somebody who's going to support you? Because sometimes one person they feel like they're the one that's leading the charge and that they're going to be on their own. Or if they don't get pregnant, that their partner's going to leave them, right? Because there's a lot about being producing an heir or something that's like old thinking of like, oh, I'm not fertile. Oh, maybe my partner will leave me because I'm not going to produce. Hey, those ideas are, yeah, they're there. These old, like really old
100%.
things. Yeah.
I mean, I love that. And like, I bet every woman listening to this podcast is going to run out, get a picture of herself, get a picture of her partner, get a picture of her baby, tie that up, throw it under her bed, and you can thank Cho for that and your feng shui master before that. Like, and people think this is dumb shit, Cho. Like, people blow this stuff off. But I think that, I mean, like, even in my own practice, the women that I see really getting into this from a physical, mental, spiritual perspective, and they really take in this idea of receiving. I mean, I tell my clients all the time, conceiving is all about receiving. And I think that we as women have had that aspect of us stunted over the decades. Receiving has been made weak, receiving has been made wrong, needy, like you're some kind of a dumpster fire if you need support. And I see, you probably see this too. I mean, I see women going about this journey trying to DIY stuff that they have no business DIYing, and then wondering why they're not getting the result.
Yeah, totally. I mean, or they're looking for it in places that are not useful, which again, going back to, the cookies on your computer or
The
speaking to,
message boards and
yeah, which are very challenging and also drawing into whatever fears you have. So
yeah.
yeah, if you're afraid that you're never going to have a baby, then you're going to be very attracted to the people who are, say, I've been trying and trying, it's not working, I've got this illness. And then you start to and this is like one of the things when you're in like a medical school or when you're in clinic, and they start talking about these conditions that people have, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, my skin's itching, or you start to feel like, yeah. So, yeah, so that's why, like, really, there's a lot. I mean, and I say definitely research for a healthy amount, but very careful, right? Like,
You got to protect your space. You got to protect your peace.
yeah. And again, that's also like another, thing is really like, this needs to become a priority, not an obsession. And, so I'd say 99% of my patients are, very highly educated, very highly motivated, very driven, which in and of itself is one of the problems is, because they're like, I need to get it now. I get what I want. And the harder I try, it's not working. And, I say, like, here's your career is like here, and having the baby is here. So they're super high on the importance. You just need to this needs to be just a little more of a priority, right? A
Yeah.
little bit more, like, if you can move that meeting so that you can come and get treatment, or you can work from home or whatever, do that. Like, create that space so that you can, like, already like pattern out that when you have a child, are you going to decide you're going to work part time, or then like start implementing some of that stuff now, like feel it, like that you have the flexibility, because that's going to help you. But if you feel trapped and then you're trying to like bring more in to something that's overstuffed, then it's a lot harder to do because there's no space. There's no space.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, we'll have to talk about this in another conversation, but I also really see that women subordinate the feminine, and you're trying to do the most feminine thing you can possibly do. And that's, conceive and carry and give birth to a child from a very masculine perspective. In fact, I did a podcast episode on, are you trying to get pregnant like a man? For that
But it's so true. It's a true perspective that, the world is has been modeled after a very masculine energy, and it doesn't work for women to be like, boom, you got to do it this way, forcing it. It's very counter, productive. I mean, it doesn't mean that it doesn't work for women, but they tend to get really, like they feel like they've been chewed up. They go through the process and they're a wreck. And that is, a very large part of, when I'm working with women and they're seeing physicians, is really like coach them on, or even debrief them on what was said, because they'll hear one thing and they're like, oh my God. Or they'll look it up. And I'm like, I don't think that's what it means. And you can definitely email the doctor, email them. And if they're not responding to you, then, also maybe like you need a different clinic.
Yeah. Well, well, I really appreciate everything that you shared here, Cho, because I think that when we can understand that you can be supported by Western medicine, you can be supported by Chinese medicine and many different modalities. Like, it's not a black and white scenario. It's about cultivating the kinds of things that are going to support you in your success, to not be afraid of it, not be afraid of, looking at other things outside of Western medicine, and not taking their, the perspective that if you're over 35, if you've had some failures in the past, that somehow that's the end of the story. It's not a verdict. None of this is a verdict. Like,
Yeah,
none of this
exactly.
it ain't over until you're holding your baby, if that's what you choose. And I think I think you bring a lot to the table with what you're doing and the kind of perspective that it takes to really help women become successful. And we're going to put links in the show notes to your book. Everybody run out and go get Will I Ever Get Pregnant by Cho. And I think you're going to love it. And, so in closing this out, if you were going to make a statement and encourage women to keep going, like, what would you say?
What I would say is, or what I do say is, really, if you feel like no matter what someone has said to you, there's this knowing, and what we talked about earlier, this pulling, that you are meant to have a child and get pregnant. That is the thing that you need to hold on to, and don't let anything else dissuade you, because all the other stuff is really like distraction. And that's that, like, that feeling. I talk about it in the book, is really like about the picture. If you're going to do the feng shui cure, whatever picture that you choose, you have to be very drawn to it. Just like, people are drawn to puppies and kittens, how they're like, I need that, I want like that. You feel that desire and energy. And that is that energy that is going to connect you to that higher energy to be able to receive. So it really is that signal that you're like to draw in. And that's something to not think like, oh, I want it so bad and I'm not going to get it. But really, like, it's for me. It's for me. And very important. So no matter what all the negative stuff is around, that is going to help you. And that will also guide you when choosing the people to work with. And also, really, when you read stuff, or you listen or watch things, you're going to connect in with that inner wisdom, that inner healer, that's also going to say, this feels right. Right? Because as women, we have this intuition, and this is also part of that creative energy we have with that, that Bao Mai, is really connect that and know that, like, the doubt, don't let, the second guess yourself. Right. And I think that's going to be the important thing to hold on to. So when you're like, make a choice of what you're going to buy in the supermarket, or like, you're going to like feel it, like, oh, this right, or this thing, or to just know. And then it makes it easier. It makes it a lot easier.
Oh, yeah, I 100% agree. And I appreciate what you said there, because I think in the end, that when we take responsibility for making our dream come true, we let nothing stand in the way, because statistics are manipulated. People's opinions are, well, a dime a dozen. And, what really matters at the end of the day is that you follow your heart. And now we have a word for that, the Bao Mai, and really seeing that there's wisdom in that, and don't give up on yourself, because if you want it, there's going to be a way to get it.
Exactly.
So thank you so much, Cho. We appreciate you being on, and I think that we are definitely going to be changing lives with what you had to share here. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Roseanne.
Love this episode of the Fearlessly Fertile podcast? Subscribe now and leave an awesome review. Remember, the desire in your heart to be a mom is there because it was meant for you. When it comes to your dreams, keep saying hell yes.